Welcome to the Mental Health Book Club podcast with your hosts, Sydney Timmins and the Secret Psychiatrist. We would like to take this opportunity to let you know that we will be covering a diverse range of mental health topics that may be distressing to some listeners. You can find a full list of the topics being covered in our show notes. Please check the show notes before listening to any of our episodes.
And I wanted to touch on a myth about bipolar patients are really aggressive, okay? Now, I'm going to talk about aggression in a lot more detail after I just deal with this myth. So I need to tackle this question quite sensitively, I think. Now, it's been noted in a population survey, and I'm going to explain this. So I'll just talk about what the survey said. They said about 25 to 34% have been seeing aggressive behaviour in bipolar type 1. Okay, now I'm going to go into this because I'm sure there's lots of people going, oh my gosh, no, I don't agree, etc. Now, possibly this is due to trouble with extreme emotion. So this individual is unable to tolerate their extreme emotional dysregulation, they're irritable, intolerant with others, impatient, that could lead to harm. Now, this is a really diverse topic to talk about. Now, I don't want people thinking if you have mental health, that means people are aggressive. That is not the case at all. Okay, everyone is different, it's multivariate. So I'll make a case example. If you have a patient with a criminal background, I'll just make it very stereotypical to make it an easy example. They're known to have raped somebody or murdered, and they have antisocial personality traits, and they happen later on to be diagnosed with bipolar type 1. In certain situations, because this person doesn't tolerate stress very well and already has a high risk background of criminality, they more likely to be more aggressive if they can't control their emotions well or relapsing. So that's something to keep in mind. And aggression doesn't have to also mean to others, it can be to yourself. So if you're going through a depressive episode, and I'm going to talk about depression in another podcast, you might be aggressive towards yourself, you might self-harm, you might try and commit suicide. So it can be aggression towards yourself as well. And also aggression, dangerous. You could be dangerous in the form of how you're living your life. So as I said before, if someone's very manic and overspending, you're putting yourself in a danger of exploiting yourself financially. So that's a danger to yourself and your lifestyle. So please keep in mind, anyone listening, that it doesn't mean that you're being aggressive to other people necessarily. It could be to yourself and putting yourself in situations that are very high risk. If you're going through a manic episode to an extreme form, so if you think you have a superhero power, you might go on a roof and try and fly. Okay, so these are things to take into account. So don't put it in a box that you're trying to hurt someone else. It could be that you're being aggressive to yourself but not aware of it. So I just wanted to touch on that. And I thought at this point it would be really good, Sydney, if we could have a talk about aggression generally with patients. So before I do, what are your, being a mental health patient, what are your kind of thoughts about aggression with mental health?
I found that I would only usually become aggressive with the person that was closest to me, and that was either myself or my husband. And I'm not proud of it. I wish I could take it back, but unfortunately that's the way it was, is that I got myself so worked up. It's this emotional dysregulation. It's the fact that I couldn't understand what emotions were happening. I would get myself so overwhelmed by the situation that the only thing that I could do was kind of react, and unfortunately that was usually in an aggressive way. So really for me, even though there was aggression at my husband, most of that aggression was towards myself. I self-harmed, I impulsively eat. We've talked about how I binge eat and unfortunately still do now. Although in some ways, I probably still binge eat because it's the lesser of all of the things that I used to do. I would drink alcohol to excess. I would take risks such as I've had my driving license taken away because I declared to the DVLA when I was telling them that I had multiple sclerosis that I also had borderline personality disorder. And in the past, before I was diagnosed, a long time ago, I would have driven maybe erratically and at higher speed than I should do. But because my doctor said that they had seen me because of my borderline personality disorder, they just took my license away and didn't tell me. And that then obviously caused knock-on effects because no one had spoken to me to find out the real story. So in the past, it would have been an issue, but I'm very conscious. I don't want to put anyone else at risk. I don't want to hurt people. Hurt me, no problem. But anyone else, I must admit, I do beat myself up quite a lot about my past behaviours and the impact it has had on my relationship with my husband. And unfortunately, I was a perpetrator of domestic violence because I was violent towards him. But as a result of, it got to a point, so in 2013, I think it was, or 2013, around that time, I had got to the point where it was just too much and I attempted suicide. I failed because he caught me, so he found what I was trying to do, and then I was basically marched off to hospital because I didn't think anything was wrong, and it was only then that they went, yeah, you've got this, and they were like, this is the description. I was like, that's my life, that's me. And I think it's really sad that there is this thought that people with any kind of mental health issue are going to be aggressive towards others, because I wouldn't want to do that. I mean, it's not really what I wanted. Does that make sense? And I would definitely disassociate when this happened. I wouldn't feel like I was in my body at the time. And yeah, extremely frightening. But yeah, that's kind of my story. My view is that I think people should really talk to others and find out what their story is, and not jump to conclusions just because I have this mental health issue. I mean, the DVLA jumped to conclusions in some ways because my doctor, instead of saying that I'd
quite
gone
a frightening
for
experience,
anxiety, that I'd gone for my borderline personality disorder, and they just yanked my license, which then caused issues for me to continue therapy because I couldn't get there. And I was like, look, if I was at the point where I was having issues, I wouldn't be ringing you to tell you and find out what was going on. I would just drive. Socia, I'd be still driving without a license. That's what I would have done. And that's probably more harmful than me going, well, I'll have to stop driving, which is what I did in the end.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that. It's quite insightful, actually, from somebody that's been on the other side in a way, rather than a doctor talking about it. So thank you. I wanted to talk about aggression. So not many people know sort of how a doctor feels and what they need to do with aggression. And I wanted to go through sort of the risk assessment. So just so people are clear. Okay.
Yeah, because I mean, I had a crisis plan, and obviously they would have risk assessed me and stuff. So this is quite interesting because I now get to see what you guys would have done on the other side.
All right, so I'll kind of go from the beginning. So when I first became a doctor, I never thought about risk. And when I say risk, I mean harm from a patient to others, from others to a patient, unless it was a safeguarding thing. I only thought about safeguarding, really. I never thought about a risk from a patient to me or staff. And, you know, I worked on surgery and cardiovascular and pediatrics and things, and it never concerned me unless it was a safeguarding issue. So I never used to think about, if I go onto a ward, where are my emergency routes? Because I never would think that a patient would harm me, because that would never have crossed my mind. I became a doctor to help people, and so I've never thought about the other side. Would the patient even want to help me help them? So that never crossed my mind. And then when I entered psychiatry and I became a psychiatrist, the very first day of all psychiatrist training, you talk about risk. Okay, and you go in a lot of detail about this, and that was really foreign to me as a person, and I think to all of us, because as doctors you don't think about violence with patients because you go in to save lives, and that's your main aim. So in the training, you're really aware of your surroundings, from basic things such as if you're a woman, if you're wearing earrings, because someone could rip them off for you. You think about your hair. So I used to have very long hair, and even to have a ponytail because someone might grab it. So now I've got short hair. Okay. So other things such as women might have shoes, like ballerina shoes or with a little heel. And I used to wear flat sort of ballerina shoes or sometimes with a little heel if I was working in a clinic. And the reason that was important, if you're in an emergency situation and the patient's being violent to you, can you run away effectively? So now I always wear some sort of shoelace kind of shoe, okay, so they can't come off me if I need to escape quickly. Other things to think about that, and these are all little things, but I thought would be useful for everyone to hear about it, because this is what a doctor has to think about every day as a psychiatrist. Your clothes. So for a woman, obviously if you're wearing a dress and you're working with a forensic patient, so now I always wear trousers. So certain things to think about. And obviously for men, your shirt, is it tucked in or not on the trousers? Can a woman rip the buttons off quickly? Obviously, if you're wearing any rings or bracelets, not only do you have to think about sort of bare below the elbows for infection control, but can a patient grab hold of say if a man's wearing a watch and then grab your arm and pull you towards them? So it's certain, just what you're wearing is the very first thing. So before you leave home, you think about what you're wearing, okay? Even things as you shouldn't really chew gum as a psychiatrist, because if you're working with a patient with forensic history and they see you drop your gum in the bin, they might get it to block the lock. So people can't get in and out of their doors, and so it's a risk. So it's a lot of things to think about. And also your personal safety. What do you put on social media? Because 20% of staff that work in mental health are stalked by their patients, okay? And in 1 year, 10% in 1 year. So it's very extreme and it's very serious, and it needs to be taken seriously by staff. So I remember when I first came to psychiatry, my first day, I was really shocked, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, what have I got myself into? Because I'm a human being as well.
I would have probably gone, sorry guys, I think I need to go and give myself at least half an hour to think this through. Thanks very much. Just give me a minute.
So I remember I was sitting there and I was thinking, I've left a career of surgery and now I'm talking about violence. So it was a really extreme day for me. I remember really, really thinking about this, and it's stuff I never thought about before ever. It never crossed my mind.
I mean, I'm saying,
no, you don't.
You got to make sure you've got the right shoes on, and wow.
Yeah, you don't, because you go to work. You don't think about your own safety in that way, do you? It's just you don't. You're at work, you think you're safe. So it's a lot of things kind of thrown at you. And, we're not ninjas, we're doctors, we're healers. We're not, we're not security guards. So
although I've now got a picture of you in some kind of ninja outfit.
Oh.
Just walking down the halls of the hospital.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So there's a lot of things that we had to think about, obviously. And so before we ever go to work in any, whether it's a clinic or whether it's a psychiatry hospital, we always have to know our exit routes for our own safety, because we do, and people need to remember this, and I'm a very big advocate, just because you've got mental health doesn't mean you're dangerous. However, there is an increased risk, and we do work with forensic patients. That means patients that have come from prison with a background of murder, rape, violence. Okay, so this is to be taken seriously. And one needs to remember, even if you're a prisoner and you have mental health, you're still entitled to have a doctor. But that does not mean that doctor doesn't have to be aware of their own safety, all right, just because you're in prison or not. So that's to be considered. So that's what happens, and we carry an alarm for our own safety if something happens. But there is no security, there is no police in a hospital, okay? So staff put themselves actually in a great deal of risk every single day, because we don't have anything. We just have our talking therapy and we have medications, and there's only so much you can do. So I remember when I was on a night shift, and obviously I'm not going to go into too much detail because confidentiality. So in a brief, just changing a few details, I remember I had done a night shift, and it was my first night shift as a psychiatrist, and very different because I was very used to the surgical night shift and what to do. And these are all these things I was thinking about. You have to always make sure you lock the door, and you have the alarm, and I always made sure I was dressed appropriately, and I'd cut my hair because I'd seen actually a patient grab another person's hair, and I just thought, you know what, it's fine, I don't need to have long hair, and that's fine, you can have long hair. It was just certain things for me that I wanted to do. And there was a patient that was, so you have something called a section 136. So police, for those that don't know, if you're out in the street and you see someone that you feel is mentally unwell to a point that they need help acutely, they can call the police, and the police put them, if they feel, on a section 136, and they take them to a place of safety. So that might be A&E or a psychiatric hospital, okay, depending on the case and what's close and what's available. So police had brought in a patient that they found and put them on a 136. So I, as a psychiatrist, I have to assess them and to see whether this patient needs to be admitted or can be discharged, or if they even have mental health issues. Because you have to remember, just because you see someone on the street and they're acting oddly, doesn't mean they have mental health. You know, they could be drunk, they could be on drugs. That doesn't mean you have mental health. So
yeah, they could also be having an issue with their sugar levels because of their diabetes.
Absolutely.
Sometimes they act in an odd manner when they have a hypo.
Exactly.
So it could be anything.
Could be anything. It could be delirium as well if you're very acutely unwell medically, that you're acting a certain way. So that doesn't mean you have mental health. But anyway, so you assess them. And the long story short, this patient I felt didn't have mental health issues and actually attacked a nurse. And the police weren't there because the police, you know, they felt they could leave and the patient was safe, and they left. And so this unfortunate nurse had been attacked, and I mean, I won't go into sort of what I do in that emergency case, but things to think about there were this patient didn't have mental health problems and he had drugs, so that was in the system. So that could have been why he was so aggressive, or it could have been his personality, because he did have a criminal record as well. So in that particular case, it was, you know, this patient in a way shouldn't have been in hospital and did put staff in danger as well. And this person, you know, had to be dealt with the police after. But so when we see patients, the three things we always think about are risk to others, i.e. patient's harm to others, risk from others to the patient. So if the patient is at harm's way from somebody or someone's, and also risk to self. So if the patient puts themselves at risk, and that can be really varied. So for instance, if a person is homeless, that puts them at risk of exploitation from living on the streets. If they're taking drugs, if they're not taking their medication, because then they're at risk of relapsing in their mental health. Also, if they have suicidal ideation, I'll talk about depression in another podcast. So if that risk of self-harm, obviously that could lead to suicide. So there's lots of different factors. And also with risk, you think about historical risk factors. So going back to forensics, you have an array of different assessments because it's very important, because you do deal with individuals that have come from prison or have some sort of criminal record, and these are serious. This is always to be taken seriously, okay? And you look at the historical risk factor. So my experience when I worked in forensics, I have to say, I watched a lot of TV. I'm a big film buff, and I have a very overactive imagination. So, you know, I'm still a human being, and when I thought I was going to forensics, my first thoughts were really huge, you know what you see in America, like huge men that have come from prison, incredibly aggressive. And I'll be honest, I was absolutely petrified. You know, I'm not a big girl, and even if for a man, I think, you know, it's very intimidating.
I mean, you don't know what's gonna happen.
Exactly. And you know, like I said, I'm not a ninja. As much as I want to be a Power Ranger, I'm not. And it's not like I can pull out my moves on my patients anyway. I'm there to help them. And so that was a really initial, very terrifying experience for me. And there are a few cases where I actually ethically found myself thinking, do I want to still be a doctor? Because I was dealing with patients that were paedophiles, rapists, and I found it very uncomfortable. Obviously not going in the details, but some of the horrific nature of these cases really, on a personal note, I thought, you know, as a human being, I was really affected by that. And I found myself thinking, I don't know if I want to be a doctor for these individuals. But obviously, as a doctor, you take an oath and you will always do the best you possibly can, the best care for the best interest of the patient. But on a side note, you know, doctors are human beings and you do have the same thoughts and emotions that other people do. Okay, but you will always treat your patients with the most respect you possibly can. But I did find myself very uncomfortable positions dealing with patients that I, on an ethical, humanitarian level, really did not agree with, obviously, what had happened.
Really difficult.
Some to do I think it's really difficult, and I have a lot of respect for my colleagues that do forensic. It's something I don't think I want to excessively be involved in forensics. It's not for me, and I think that's just because I just find it very uncomfortable sometimes, the cases, and I don't know. I really respect my colleagues that go into this, because some of these patients are psychopaths, and psychoanalytically, forensic psychotherapy, it can be very dark sometimes. And in one way, that's exciting for psychiatrists to deal with patients with such complex, quite in-depth, dark psychotherapy material coming out. But it can also be quite troublesome, I think, to hear and listen to on a personal note.
Yeah, how can you go away when you've heard something so awful and horrific that you then have to go and live the rest of your life, as it were?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And not so long ago, psychiatrist retirement age was 55, because psychiatrists, you deal with a lot of stress. And the thing is, when a patient expresses themselves and their personality, it has a way, and I wrote an article about this with the Royal College of Psychiatrists, that it has a way of cutting through your skin that no other specialty can. So in surgery, I felt very detached from my patients, because, you would do surgery and I wouldn't be emotionally attached to them or involved, because you just do something objectively and done. But with psychiatry, the patient really projects into you. Okay. And I'll do an episode on psychoanalysis and what that means. But
yeah, that would be interesting.
People's personalities and their mind have a way of really enmeshing within yourself. And it's not easy to detach from your patients, because they project into you and then you contain it within yourself.
Yeah.
And that's something that Beyond, which I'll talk about in another podcast on psychoanalysis, spoke about containment. And you as a psychiatrist have to contain all of this that you see. And you see patients at your worst. Okay, you don't go to hospital when you're good.
I'm fine. It's all good.
Exactly. You see the worst possible cases of extreme. So you see very disturbed patients, and some patients are absolute joy to deal with, because they might, whatever's coming out is actually quite enjoyable psychosis. And I mean enjoyable in the sense of it's quite pleasant. It might be, they think so. It might be, I'll give an example. A patient might think they're a biscuit, and so don't want to drink tea because obviously digestive biscuits melt and dissolve. So something quite soft, light-hearted in a way. But that doesn't always happen, and you deal with very frank psychosis that can be very dangerous and quite disturbed. And the way patients behave because of that can be quite disturbing. And so that can be very disturbing, and that can increase, your risk of aggression if you have that background as well, and you're acutely psychotic and you're not in control sometimes what's going on or have that insight. So with mental health, again, you're not aggressive, but you can be prone to it, obviously, if it's not controlled, if you have that tendency. But some patients we have don't necessarily, and I say this loosely, don't have mental health but are aggressive. So when I say that, I mean they might be taking drugs, but that's not a diagnosis. You can't say, you can say they've got substance misuse at harmful use, fine, but
it's not.
That's a choice. You take a choice to take drugs, and because of that, then you become aggressive. And that might just also be your personality, but that doesn't mean that you don't still deal with staff. And I'm always very cautious about safety of staff, and I'm going to write an article this week which I'll publish about abuse on staff, especially in mental health. So I want everybody to please keep in mind that, staff, and it's obvious, are there to help you, but please keep in mind that we are staff. We don't deserve abuse, just like a bus driver doesn't deserve abuse when they're just doing their job.
Exactly. You don't go into work expecting that you're going to have to defend yourself. Maybe a bit more so as a psychiatrist, just because you're in that environment. But generally, most people don't go to work with that kind of fear going on.
No, exactly. And you do, I've noticed working psychiatry, I'm very alert now. And like I said, I never was before in surgery. Why would I be? But now I'm very acutely aware of myself. And that's why you typically find psychiatrists, sometimes when you're talking to them, you find them, and I do it myself, I've noticed on these podcasts, I go, a lot, because you're really trying to assess patients. And you sometimes find that a psychiatrist doesn't tell you much about themselves. Whereas if you were in another specialty like cardiovascular, you might find your cardiologist quite chatty and they openly talk about their family life, and you don't really find that with psychiatrists. So I've noticed when I worked with a forensic patient, asked me a personal question, I said I'm not going to delve into that, and part of me as a human felt really bad because I didn't want to hurt that patient's feelings, but on the other half I've got to remain professional because I do work with acutely unwell people with a criminal background as well, and I've got to also maintain my safety because 20% of psychiatrists in their life will be stalked or harmed. So you've got to really think about that. So when those with mental health, if you find your psychiatrist, you feel they're being cold with you, it's not that they're being cold. You have to think about from their point of view, they've got to also maintain their confidentiality and their own privacy just in case. Because they don't know what patients are capable of. We're not mind readers.
Yeah, you guys need to protect yourself. I mean, there are unfortunately people that would take advantage if you were to give certain personal details to people, and that in itself is very scary.
So it's just something to keep in mind of. Exactly. So I just want any patients to be aware. It's not that we don't care about. Of course, we would love to just have a chat with a cup of tea, but we can't. So don't ever take offence if a psychiatrist doesn't give you personal information. It's not that they don't like you. It's just we can't. And that's another reason I also just want to bring in. So sometimes when you're an inpatient, you have ward rounds, obviously, and we ask that you don't bring hot drinks into the ward round. So some patients really take offence to that because obviously not everyone has that tendency. You might be there for something completely not even relevant with any risk of aggression, and we completely understand that, but we have to be boundaried with all patients and everyone do the same thing, because there's been cases where patients have scolded staff with hot drinks. Okay, so it's something to really keep in mind. And when sometimes you come in to a psychiatric ward, we do a search, so we just make sure you don't have any weapons. There's nothing there that could harm staff or yourself, actually, or others, and that's the biggest concern. We don't want you to hurt yourself, and that's why you're in hospital. So it's actually there for safety of everybody. So it's not just that we're worried about us. Actually, we think about ourselves very little. It's about you and the other patients to keep everybody safe, because you're in a ward with loads of other patients with an array of mental health issues and backgrounds and criminality as well, and we need to make sure everybody is safe.
Yeah, and also accidents can happen.
Absolutely.
I mean, with hot drinks, before I got diagnosed with MS, and this is one of the reasons why I realised something was wrong, I managed to knock a hot cup of tea 3 times over the same guy.
That's painful.
Literally, he got up, he made another cup of tea, brought it back, and then knocked it over again. I was like, I'm really sorry. But yeah, and you're like,
that hurts. I've done that to myself. That really hurts.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm like,
poor man.
I'm so sorry that I've just poured tea or down your neck for the 3rd time.
Gosh.
Yeah, and I was like, I'm going to the doctors, it's okay.
Oh, poor thing.
I was like, just no one come anywhere near me with hot fluids because I'm liable to knock it over.
Gosh,
it was awful.
Thing. You've just reminded me, actually, I don't know why I thought of this. I want to talk about aggression. It's not just with people. You have to also think about if you've got animals or, property around you, if you're damaging that property, if you, in a flat share. We've had unfortunate cases where, dogs have been really maltreated because they haven't been looked after in acute relapses of patients, and it's not obviously they want to. Some do, understand, because some people have that tendency, but most people don't want to hurt their pets. They love them, their family.
They're a pet.
Yeah, their family. But there's also aggression with your property. So you might be really damaging, your electricity, ripping things off the walls. You might be putting your neighbours at risk as well. So aggression and risk really is so broad, but it's something that every patient has their own individual, as you said with you, risk assessment and plan of action to keep you safe and others around you safe.
And I have to admit, you saying about aggression towards things, I must admit that there was quite a period of time where Lawrence literally had to take his belongings away from me because I would purposefully damage them, because I felt that he was attacking me and putting me down and making me feel rubbish, when in fact it was my own triggers and things. But he had to remove things from me because I would damage them. I mean, I've broken electronics and so that's definitely something else that I've unfortunately done.
Yes. I mean, that's quite common for family members or those around them to get involved in that way, just to keep you safe as well, and whoever it is, obviously. So that's quite common, actually, and it's a good safety, I think, behaviour to do.
Yeah, take things away.
Yeah.
If I can't get hold of
That's
them.
particularly used in those who self-harm quite often, just to keep medication away, or knives and sharp objects that they could be prone to using.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that was the Secret Psychiatrist talking about aggression in mental health. I found, once again, this episode extremely interesting, and I hope that you did too. If you have any questions for either myself or the Secret Psychiatrist, please get in contact with us. We are here to hopefully answer your questions. You can find us both on Twitter, Facebook, and at our websites. So for the Secret Psychiatrist, it's thesecretpsychiatrist.com. For the Mental Health Book Club, it is mentalhealthbookclub.com. If you send it through to me, it's not a problem. I can send it on to the Secret Psychiatrist. Don't forget, if you haven't already, we would love for you to share the Mental Health Book Club podcast with your family and friends. If you enjoyed the podcast, it would be so helpful if you could leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to support the podcast on what we're doing financially, you can become a member of our Patreon page, which you get additional perks for being a patron of the podcast. The next few podcast episodes will be all about bipolar related disorders. So we're going to do something on postpartum bipolar disorder and also cyclothymia. And remember, it's okay to not be okay. And if you're not okay, talk.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Mental Health Book Club podcast. If you need additional help with your mental health, please contact the Samaritans on 116-123, which is a 24-hour helpline. And if you need additional information about mental health issues, please visit Mind at mind.org.uk.
Our next book will be Birth of a New Brain, Healing from Postpartum Bipolar Disorder by Diane Harwood. And our next episode with the Secret Psychiatrist will be about postpartum bipolar disorder.
If you'd like to find out more about the MHBC podcast, please visit our website, mentalhealthbookclub.com. We really hope that you enjoy this podcast, and we would like to hear what you think. Please head over to Twitter and follow us at MHBC_podcast, or head over to Facebook and follow our Facebook page, which is Mental Health Book Club. If you would like to show your support further, please share us with your family and friends and leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. We are now on Patreon. Please head over to patreon.com/MHBC to donate as little as $2 a month to the Mental Health Book Club podcast. As a result of your donation, you will get early access to some of our episodes, you will get specific episodes that are only for patrons, and you'll be eligible to be entered into free prize draws.